What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of the ReThink podcast. My name is Cameron Friend.
I'm Kennedy Mack.
And welcome back to another episode. The ReThink podcast is where we want to talk about critical issues that affect you on a daily basis and also give you the tools of nonviolence to learn how to combat these issues in our world. And first of all, I just want to go ahead and say that one of my favorite people is coming on to co-host with the podcast today. Kennedy, thank you for coming on today and helping us with this.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and listen to Erin.
Absolutely. It's going to be a great conversation today. I think, Kennedy, it always warms my heart to have an AKA next to me. Just makes me feel like I'm a part of something, you know. Just
okay.
All right, y'all. So we have an absolute treat today. We are going to have an amazing conversation with the one and only Erin Lowry. Erin, how are you doing today?
I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, again, people, if you're not familiar with Erin, you're going to get real familiar with her today. We're going to have some really important conversations around finances, investing, student debt. Now, I don't know about you, but those are all issues that affect me on an everyday basis.
Every day. Every month, actually, when it comes out of my bank account.
Every month. Yeah. You know, I know that we've had a halt on paying some of the student loans back for a while, but
Not me.
Yeah, we can try to pay those back if we can. I imagine we'll talk about that a little bit today. But anyway, so Erin, just a little brief description on who you are. You are the author of Broke Millennial Takes on Investing, and this platform has helped literally thousands of people. And so just give me a little bit of background information, like how did you even get started? Because I read in your bio, I read on your page that you had a really transformational story that involves some Krispy Kreme donuts.
I did. My very first relationship and memory of money happened when I was about 7 years old. Something that's important to know in my family growing up. My parents were never big on just like handing us money, not just handing over the allowance. Oh, if you want to go get something, we had to figure out how to earn it. And I say we because I have a younger sister. And that started young. So I'm 7 years old. And my mom was having the most suburban of things, a yard sale. And I was like, listen, and this was in about 1996. So if people are coming to get like a used Buns of Steel video on VHS from our yard at 6:30 in the morning, I bet they will buy Krispy Kreme donuts from two little girls. I was correct. But what I had to do is I had to go to my dad and say, hey, I have this idea. Could you go buy the donuts for me? I was 7. I didn't have the money to go, the initial startup capital, if you will, to go buy these donuts. I also couldn't get to Krispy Kreme by myself. So my dad drove that morning, got a few dozen boxes, came back. I set up on this little Fisher Price picnic table, had my fanny pack on, which are now trendy again. So that's exciting. And I was ready to go. We sold out fast. And my dad comes over. And I have this pile of quarters on the table, and I'm so excited. I knew I was going to go to Toys R Us and get 2 Nerf gun Super Soakers because I was totally the kid who stayed at the pool all summer every year. Those were super in at the time, those water guns, and I was very, very excited. And he looks at the pile, and let's say it was $20. And I went, I have $20. And he goes, all right, well, it cost me $5 to buy you the donuts. And then Kaylin worked for you. So that's my sister's name. So you need to give her $5. So actually your net profit is $10. And he didn't just tell me this, he took the money from me. And that was my first experience with like anything related to money. The only other slightly tangential experience was candy tax. When I was a little kid, when we went trick-or-treating at Halloween, we came back, dumped out the candy, and my parents would levy a candy tax and take, mind you, some of the premium pieces out of our haul as a tax for taking us out trick-or-treating and like helping with our costumes. So taxation and net profit were 2 concepts that I learned at a very young age from my parents.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, I don't know. Did you have jobs when you were
No. My mom said your only job is school. So
yeah, I feel
that was pretty much it.
You know, I'm from Colorado, so I had like a little like snowplow business or whatever, but there was no tax system. If anything, I just figured once I got all the money, it's my money to keep. So that's a crazy lesson that you learn even that early, to learn about that system and bartering and tax and all that. So that's actually really amazing. So man, we can go ahead and get some.
Yeah. So how did that lead you to the book, and how did you get to New York, and how were you able to graduate from college debt free in New York City?
So this is all a bit of a winding path, but those initial experiences that I have where my parents really kept teaching me these foundational lessons about money in a way that was really tangential and appropriate for whatever age bracket I was in. Another big thing that they would always do is that if I wanted something, I had to come up with at least 50%, if not 100% of the cost of that thing. So one of the first things I ever remember buying for completely on my own when I was in third grade, clogs were super in. And I remember going to a Payless shoe store, spending $13.95 on a pair of blue velvet clogs. And I was so excited. And I went to a Catholic school and clogs were banned as part of the dress code no more than 2 days later. So it was also like an early experience in wasting your money because then I also outgrew them like 4 seconds after that. But my mom was like, I'm not spending money on this because I know that you're just going to outgrow these shoes. I don't see value in these, but if you see value in them, you can spend your own money. And these lessons just kept coming like that. And what ultimately happened when I was 18, my parents, going through the college application process, and my parents said to me, you are responsible for 50% of your college education, which is more than so many people have. And I was very fortunate that that was my case, but I was a brat. And I did not recognize that I was fortunate that that was the case because the school that I went to, everybody I knew, their parents were paying the full freight for them to go to college. So what you grew up around is normal to you. So I start door slamming and pouting and being really upset that I have to come up with 50% of my college education. Because what my dad did was write up 2 different bills for how much it would cost for me to go to college. One was the school that I wanted to go to. And if I had to pay for that one 50%, I would come out with about $70,000 worth of student loan debt. And for context, I wanted to be a theater and journalism double major. So not super financially viable careers. And on the other bill that my dad slid across our dining room table, it talked about the fact that if I went to the school that, spoiler alert, I ended up going to, I had academic scholarships that were about 50% of my education, a little bit more than. So if I held those all 4 years, I would be able to graduate debt-free with my parents' help on the other 50%. At 18, my parents had done such a good job of explaining how to think critically about money that I was able to have the foresight to recognize you want to be in 2 careers that are slightly impractical financially. So it would behoove you to not have student loan debt when you graduated college, because otherwise you're going to just have to get a job and start paying off those loans. Because I had an understanding of how the system worked, that gift of financial literacy was incredibly critical for me because I was able at 18 to make that kind of a decision. And I gave up going to my dream school so I could live my dream life. And I thought about that short-term sacrifice for that long-term gain. And I went to the other school, ended up being able to graduate debt-free. I did marry somebody with over $50,000 of student loan debt. So don't worry, I got mine in the end when it came to the student loan front. And I have helped pay off more than 50 grand of student loan debt.
Yeah.
But I personally was able to graduate debt-free. And I knew at that time when I went into college at 18 that my whole dream was to live in New York City. That's really where I wanted to be. So I really fixated on being able to put myself in a position to get there, which is, again, why I knew I wanted to graduate without debt. And I moved here in the summer of 2011. I had a job working at the Late Show with David Letterman. I also worked at a well-known mermaid logoed coffee chain. And I was a babysitter. I had to work 3 jobs to make a little bit less than $25,000 that first year that I lived here. And had I had student loans, I'm not sure that that would have really been feasible for me to do, which is why I talk about that connecting with being able to live my dream life.
Well, what's so interesting about that is, number one, obviously your parents did an exceptional job just laying the foundation for you. But I think that's fascinating that having a long-term goal and being able to have something you can focus in on can be a target for you to help you make healthy financial decisions. Now, I did not grow up with that kind of teaching. I didn't grow up with that kind of foundation, even thinking about money. If anything, I kind of had a fear of what does it even mean to start making some of those decisions, because I didn't really know too many people that was living like that. So what would you say in terms of your takeaway from those early lessons from your mother what are some of the things that she said to you, or even some things that she taught you to help you learn the importance of saving, or even making that critical decision of not going to the school that you want right now to live the life that you want to live in the future?
A big thing that both of my parents did a great job on was modeling the behaviors they were trying to instill. And they would talk to us fairly openly about family goals, things that they were trying to do. They weren't people who would spend lavishly and then tell us like, oh, we can't afford to do this, or we can't do this, but then, come home with a new car and kind of give us that whiplash feeling that a lot of people experience throughout their childhoods. They were incredibly consistent on this is what we value financially, and also charitable giving being a pretty significant part of that, and modeling those behaviors for us throughout their lives and throughout our childhoods. And what was interesting to me, though, is again, so much of my story comes down to the gift of financial literacy and growing up in a household where we talked about money. Because when I moved here to New York City and I was working those first jobs, it became abundantly clear to me how many people, and many people of privileged upbringings, were so scared of money, never talked about money, never were informed about money. And that's what inspired me to start Broke Millennial initially, as I had gone out with a girlfriend of mine. She moved to New York to be an actress, classic story. Mm-hmm. And at the time, she had picked up a job as an executive assistant and was really hating it. And we were 23 then. I'm 32 now, for context. And I had said, I don't get it. She didn't have student loan debt. She didn't have credit card debt. Her parents could have helped her out in a pinch. I'm like, you are in the position that everyone wants to be in to take this kind of a big risk in your life. And she said, honestly, I'm scared about money. All I do is hope I have enough at the end of the month.
Wow.
And that was such a light bulb moment. And I understand how ridiculously naive that sounds. But because I grew up in a family that talked about money all the time, all of a sudden I was like, wait a second. Is this how everyone feels about money? So I started asking, and most people didn't want to engage in the conversation, which made it pretty clear that, yes, this is how people feel about money. It is a source of tension, or it's taboo, or we don't want to talk about it. And Broke Millennial started very initially as a blog, the brokemillennial.com, where I was like, I'm just going to share these funny stories of what my parents did to me as a kid, and also these early stories of trying to make it in New York City on not a lot of money, and hope that that connects with people. And it started to, and then it really snowballed into what is now a 3-book series.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many things we can take away from that. And I think that that's very hopeful and that's very encouraging, I think, for a lot of people to hear. But obviously, as an expert on the subject, there are a lot of things that are affecting, and particularly millennials, which now is, 1980 to, about 1995, 1996. So, we're all 24 to 40 years old now. So we're grown, we're getting out of school, we're either in grad school, doctors, lawyers, we're in the workforce, all this stuff. But there are some things I actually want to read. And I know I supplied you with this information earlier, but I have some information from Business Insiders on kind of where we are in the wealth gap and everything right now. So according to the Federal Reserve, millennials hold about 5% of the total wealth in the United States, while Gen X holds 27.6% of the wealth. Baby boomers hold about 52.2% of the wealth. And when baby boomers were the same age millennials in 1989, they held about 21.3% of the wealth. Now, again, much of this seems to be tied to the Great American Affordability Crisis, which points to a rise in living costs and housing, student loan debt, the fallout of the Depression in 2008, the pandemic, all that stuff. So for you, why do you, based on the information that we have, why do you think that millennial and also Gen Z, why do you think that we are struggling so much financially in the world that we live in now?
I mean, affordability obviously being a huge factor. How many of us have heard from a boomer at some point in our lives, like, when I was your age, I had a full-time job and paid for college, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. You could. You know how much college costs these days?
Yeah, exactly.
Way more expensive. Even if you go to state school, community college, and transfer, there are ways to try to make it more affordable, but it is still significantly more expensive. And the wage stagnation that we have faced, wage has not kept up in the kind of way that they were getting paid in, mind you, one of the best economies the United States has ever seen, when the biggest, in the 80s, and early 90s, when a huge chunk of the boomers were coming up, that was an unprecedented type of economy that they were getting to experience. And if you're building wealth in tandem at that time, that's also a completely different scenario than so many of us have. But I also look at how much for so many of us as millennials, some of this is a huge gap in our education.
Wow.
And because of the fact that we are never really taught about investing, we are never taught about how to take control. We are never taught the rules of the game that we're just thrust into. All of a sudden, you're a quote unquote adult and you're supposed to just understand. And it can feel shameful or embarrassing to have to ask these questions, even though it really shouldn't. You're never taught these things. So, of course, you don't know how to immediately open up a 401k and select investments. Of course, you don't know that. Whoever taught you how to do that? But then it feels embarrassing because it's like, well, I'm an adult. I guess I'm supposed to know how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's a combination of you get access to certain wealth building tools at certain inflection points in your life. So if you have a traditional job, which by the way, I don't. So for anybody who doesn't, we can have that conversation in a second. But if you have access to like an employer matched 401k, you're also thinking about the fact that my rent keeps going up. I have student loans. I have all of these other critical things that are part of my budget. I can't afford this right now. And then so many of us have pressed pause on investing for our future. Or, in my opinion, some people get bad advice and hear things like you shouldn't be investing at all until you're completely debt free, which frankly is just bad advice. Because especially if you have access to an employer matched 401k, or you have the ability to put even a little bit of money into an IRA, you are not just saving for retirement, you're investing for retirement. And you should be investing early. Little bits add up. The biggest advantage you have as an investor is time. So if you wait until your student loans are paid off, which could be 30, 35, 40, you have lost decades worth of time for those little bits to be compounding and growing. So there's just so many reasons that millennials, on top of which graduated into a Great Recession, finally got our footing, and then a global pandemic came back around, full industry shut down. It feels a lot like we can't catch a break if we're being totally honest with ourselves.
And I don't know about you, Kennedy, but I mean, you're obviously educated as well. Do you feel like the investment that you made in the school, like, do you feel like that actually was worth it based on what you had to pay and everything to do it?
Yeah. So I knew that Spelman was the only place that I wanted to go. Did I know the cost? No. Was I worried about it? No, because I knew that's the only place I wanted to be. Hindsight is always 2020.
Yeah.
I don't regret it. Looking at my bank statement, I do a little bit, but I know, like, you dropped a lot of knowledge. So you mentioned education privilege. So the people who aren't privileged and don't have the option to have the education, what are some tips that you could provide to those people?
So the first thing that I always like to say is no matter where you stand right now, the key part is this education bit, and to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to be asking the questions, but also find a resource that is compelling and speaks to you. The beauty of the way that personal finance education has started to really go through an evolution lately is it doesn't have to be people who look like they come from a 1980s sitcom version of what Wall Street is. It doesn't have to be old white men that's giving you this information. It can be people who have gone through your lived experiences, who have written books, have a podcast, have Instagram accounts. Now, always vet information that you're getting, especially if you're getting it on Reddit, on Instagram. And hey, I'm on these places and I'm giving information too. But as someone once told me for one of my books, that information is worth as much as you paid for it. So just always make sure that you're vetting against multiple sources when it comes to getting, especially like investing information. They don't know you. They don't know your situation. Don't just blindly take investing advice from somebody on the internet or on the TV. But a big thing to me is starting with the knowledge part of it. The other bit, in order to take control, the first thing that we have to do is face the numbers. And that, I think, can be one of the most painful pieces to this whole puzzle, is you have to sit down and look at every little bit. And what I mean by that is how much money is coming in every month? What are all my monthly bills? How much do I need just to meet my baseline necessities? So rent or mortgage, transportation, so whether that's your auto loan, gas, MetroCard, whatever it is, medicine, health insurance, possibly childcare, food on the table, utilities paid, all of those expenses that are your bare essentials. How much do you need to just meet that number? How much is coming in? Are you even earning enough to meet those basic needs is really the first starting point. Then beyond that, we also want to start analyzing the debt. So we want to be looking at how much money do you have to a debtor? Like, what is the name of the lender? How much is due, that principal balance, that big number that's on the page? What is the minimum monthly payment that you have to pay? What is the interest rate? That's really painful to go down and write through all of those numbers. It's much easier to just throw the minimums at things and not have to think about it. But
I mean, I got, Netflix subscriptions, HBO,
Yep.
all that other stuff. It just comes out every month. I never look at it. Exactly. Right.
I just canceled after 6 months of having an auto alert on my phone as a reminder to cancel. I just canceled like Paramount Plus because I got it for the Meghan and Harry interview with Oprah, and I just kept forgetting to cancel it. Everybody has little ways they waste money, guys. So don't feel bad about that.
Yeah.
Literally, this is my job and I still do it. But it's also just about making sure that you have all of the information in front of you to make a plan, especially when it comes to debt and talking about debt repayment. You cannot make an actionable, helpful plan if you do not have that information in front of you. A big part to me too is don't sit in any of the guilt or shame about how it happened. Let's acknowledge how it happened. Let's look at how it happened so we try not to repeat.
Can you repeat that, please? So we can have that again. Can you repeat that again?
Please do not sit in the guilt and shame about how it happened. I think too often that's a big part of this process is people it's so painful to look at the why. Let's just address that it's happened, analyze it in just enough to know the why it happened. So maybe we can correct that for the future, but then let's time to release that feeling and we're moving on because we're making a plan and we're going to put ourselves in a better position. It's not helpful to constantly be in a shame cycle when it comes to money. And if anything, that's just a detriment to yourself and your learning experience. Next, really, is starting to figure out what kind of plan is going to work best for you. There are so many resources online about looking at ways to pay off debt. This applies to student loans and it applies to credit card consumer debt. You can kind of put them all in the big pile for debt payoff. But the two big methods that you can look up, one is called debt snowball, one is called debt avalanche. The basic difference, debt snowball, smallest balance due to largest balance due. Always pay your minimums. If you miss a minimum, stuff's going to collections and we don't want that. But any extra money, you're going to start throwing at that smallest balance first. The whole idea behind this is that it's easier to pay off that smallest balance faster. So you get a little win. It's that boost of energy and excitement. You can keep motivated to move on. On the flip side, debt avalanche focuses on interest rates, high to low. Technically, you save the most money doing this way because you knock out high interest rate balances first and then move on. But if you're not motivated that way, if you're going to be motivated by getting that little win up top, do snowball. If you're like me and you totally geek out over the numbers, avalanche is going to work for you. Or maybe a hybrid of both. I don't care what method you use as long as the debt is getting paid off. But on that topic, we all mess up in our money journeys. All of us at some point will stumble, we'll make a mistake, something will happen. My husband and I got a $65 parking ticket today because we forgot to renew the inspection on our car. Like things happen. It's really important in that moment too, that you don't just think, oh, screw it, I'm not going to do this anymore. This isn't worth it anymore. Again, with the forgiving yourself, releasing it, adjusting what you need to adjust and moving on.
Well, go ahead, Kennedy.
I was going to ask, we live in a society where, social media is so prevalent. And, you see your friends in Jamaica, Greece, Italy, paying for Starbucks, paying for Paramount Plus. We don't talk about the sacrifices that have to be made. So do you have any suggestions on, how to, balance that sacrificing and saving and paying off student debt?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, mute is a powerful thing on Instagram.
Ooh. Yeah. Oh, she said the mute button. Hey, look, my friends they in Bora Bora right now. Look, I'm gonna have to put y'all on mute for a while because I can't join that trip.
Yeah. Truly, I have muted and not unfollow because that looks aggressive, especially if it's a good friend. They don't need to know they're muted. Just mute them. Particularly if there is a group trip that you had to opt out of for whatever reason, or a wedding or a bachelorette party or what have you, mute it. When it just comes to social media, that's just one easy way to opt out for yourself. I have two tandem things for you to consider in this. One, It is so easy to let other people spend your money.
Mm.
So easy. As someone who did the math recently and shouldn't have, in the last decade, my husband and I have spent close to $30,000 attending other people's weddings.
Sheesh.
In how many years?
10.
Okay.
And it's really easy for that to happen because especially we're in the COVID wedding boom right now in 2021. And I live in New York City. No one gets married here. Just to travel to a wedding, pay for a hotel, pay for our dog to get boarded, buy a couple of meals, give a gift, easily $1,200 to $1,500 a pop. That's assuming we're not in the wedding and not paying to go to a bachelorette party, a bridal shower,
Got to pay for the dresses, got to pay for the tux, got to pay for all the stuff, the gifts and all that. I mean, I get it. Wow, that's crazy.
Now, I'm not saying you should say no to every wedding invite that you get, but it does become important to start to figure out how to balance in putting on your own financial oxygen mask, prioritizing your own financial goals, and what other people are asking of you. However, it is also really important when you're on this journey to keep in mind that investing into relationships is also something worth an investment. And sometimes that does take money. And I say that from someone who in my early 20s was really fixated on personal finance, surprise, surprise. And I would say no to things all the time. If there was an opportunity to pick up a shift at Starbucks, to babysit, to do whatever, or if it was just like, I don't value that, I don't want to pay for it, I would say no constantly. And you know what happens if you say no? People stop asking. And I only say that as a little bit of a warning to figure out how to balance for yourself, either one, providing an alternative. So your friend comes to you and says, let's go do a boozy brunch on Sunday. And you say, I really want to spend time with you. But instead of doing bottomless brunch, what if we got a bagel and went for the walk in the park? Or what if you came over and we made brunch at home and did our own mimosas? So much more cost effective.
But Erin, I have a question right there for that. Cause I feel like that speaks right. Cause we in the middle of Atlanta, right? So that speaks right to where we are, where we're living, the culture we live in. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. We got a flued out culture we got to worry about. We got the brunch culture we got to worry about, where everybody got to flex. You got to wear your brand new shoes. You got to wear the chain. You got to wear the clothes. You got to go out to here. You need to go get your steaks. You need to go get your seafood. You got to do all this stuff. And there's pressure that comes with that. And especially, if you're trying to mingle, meet people and all that, there's like expectations that come with it. So what would you say to people that are in that place where they're saying, you know what, I want to make better financial decisions, but I still really feel this societal pressure to keep up with the Joneses and at least even look like I'm keeping up with the Joneses. And I'm really afraid to say that I can't afford to do it.
And you're single, so you want to go out and meet people.
Let's talk about that, Erin. Throw that part in. What if you single? Hey, matter of fact, what if you single and then you the person that got to pay for everything? Let's talk about that part too.
Yeah.
Okay, first I feel so attacked because my sister yesterday, who is single, was asking a dating question and looked at me and my husband and went, you guys aren't any help. And it's true because we have been dating for over a decade. So Tinder wasn't even a thing when we started dating, for context. However, I very much can empathize from the business perspective, from the making friends perspective. I live in New York City, also very similar culturally in terms of the scene is to be out, like drinks and meals, and this is how we go out. This is how we socialize. Same here. There's a few things. When it comes to keeping up with the Joneses, you have to decide, is this something that I actually care about and that I prioritize or that I feel pressure to do? That's a big consideration anytime you're spending your money. Is this something that I actually value, or am I feeling pressured to value this thing? If you start to ruthlessly prioritize what you actually value and how you spend your money, you will be shocked how much richer your life starts to feel. Like, I am somebody who will push back a little bit on the indulgent happy hours and dinners. I'll do it maybe like once a month with some of my girlfriends, but I reroute that money for really nice vacations, some of which are with friends. But that is because I actually really value the travel. I don't so much value the $100 brunch. But if you do value that and you're like, but I'm going to cut XYZ other places in my life, that's the part to remember. You can have really lavish areas of your life as long as not literally every section of your life is being lived that way. So where are you willing to make the trade-offs is the big question. The other part too comes down to vulnerability, and how vulnerable are you willing to let yourself be with the people that you consider close friends of yours? And also maybe even not. Like talking about dating. It was interesting when I was writing my third book, I interviewed a lot of people about this topic on all sorts of different periods in their lives. And one was a couple that I interviewed who have been married for like 20, 25 years. And the guy pulled out a coupon on their first date. And she said for her, that was like, oh, hell yes. Because it meant that his money mentality was in alignment with her own. And I do think that's something we need to start considering when you're looking for somebody that you want to spend your life with. I get flexing in the beginning, but you don't want to be presenting a false version of yourself if you're going to 180 in 10 days to be like, by the way, this is not at all how I am and live my life. Now you can find a balance between like the coupon or maybe a happy hour deal. Like for me, that would be a love language. Even in a friendship, if somebody's like, hey, I found a happy hour, I'd be like, yes, awesome. It's a deal. We know that I like that. So that's something to be considering too. Friends, partners, what have you. How are we communicating and what signals are we sending about money early on? And are those authentic to who we are?
Hey, I just want to go ahead and say I want to pop out the podcast real quick. We got a little bit of a tidbit, a little bit of a dating tip. Hey, there's a coupon test now, so you need to pull up to a date. Pull up with the coupon now. Qdoba.
I think there's a classier way to do it. She said happy hour. So then you can just finesse it. We're gonna go to happy hour. You don't even have to tell her it's happy hour. So then I don't know you're bottling budget.
That's funny. All right, back in. That's actually a really, really good tip. And honestly, I think that leads back into her earlier point, the decision that you had to make as a younger girl about, okay, I have a school I want to go to, but more importantly, I have a dream that I'm trying to pursue. It's in New York City, and this is how it looks. In order to get there, this is the sacrifice I have to be willing to make. And we need to have that same conversation with ourselves and that honesty with ourselves. Saying, you know what, while brunch will be good, I would love to go down to the Atlanta Breakfast Club and spend another $50 getting me some chicken and waffles with another side of waffles on the side. Or, you know what, I'm trying to make a trip to Europe next week or next year, whenever you're going to do it. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that $50 aside to get that done and prioritizing that. Now, I don't know why y'all laughing. Atlanta Breakfast Club is popular.
It was the extra pancakes on the side. That was just.
I'm saying, if I'm gonna eat.
He's gonna need coupons.
If I'm gonna eat the whole thing. You know, I mean, we're going to brunch anyway.
You need the unlimited breakfast buffet is really what I'm hearing right now from this conversation. That's the angle that we're going for on
I
brunch.
feel like IHOP used to have that, but do they still have unlimited pancakes?
I think some people abused it and then they don't do it anymore.
Yeah, but I feel like you can't. Now that's the other part of the culture.
COVID.
Yeah, you COVID.
Yeah.
You
They're trying to
Yeah,
make
you
the
can't
money.
go up. That's true.
Yeah.
And they like don't want all the touch points. Anyway, the other idea in all of this too, particularly if you're like really in the early stages of trying to rebuild your financial life and you're struggling with how to balance all of this. One, be open with your friends. You'll be shocked how many other people are feeling this way. You don't know how many other people are also faking this. How many people are running up huge amounts of credit card debt? How many other people will feel great if you're like, hey, how about instead we go for a hike or some other form of a activity that you can do together that's free and affordable? Or just being honest and say, hey, I just worked in an industry that was shut down for 18 months in a pandemic, and I am now surviving on credit cards, and I don't want to keep surviving on credit cards. So to be brutally honest, no, I cannot afford that. Can we do XYZ? Always helpful to provide an alternative if you're saying no to something. Just a thought. But the other idea too, anytime you have, whether it's like unexpected income, or if you just have a set amount, it could be modest, $10, $15, like basically a cocktail out of every paycheck, go into a separate savings account, fund, friend fund, future brunches, whatever you want to call it. So you have money set aside so that sometimes you can just enthusiastically opt in and say yes, and it's not going to blow up your budget this month.
Well, I think that is phenomenal. And I think this is a great opportunity. So Broke Millennial. So can you just give us some insight and obviously plug your book, plug your series, plug what you're doing. Tell us about that platform and how people can get involved with it and also what they'll learn from it.
Well, it really all started when I was coming into a time of, I worked 3 jobs, living in New York City, not making a ton of money, but more collectively, the reason it's just Broke Millennial and not the Broke Millennial is it felt generationally like, hey, this is what it feels like to be a millennial right now, especially living in a big city. Who would have thought 10 years later, so many of us still feel that way. And I also want to point out the hedonic treadmill part of, even as you start earning more and moving up and feeling more secure in certain ways, there's just new social pressure and new ways that people are flexing. And it's very important to start to build those boundaries for yourself early, as opposed to thinking that, oh, when I make XYZ amount of money, all of a sudden things will be great. Probably not. It's probably just going to be more pressure in different ways. And for me, just the way it started was just telling stories. It's pretty obvious I like to tell stories. That's just sort of the way I tend to communicate. But I was just writing. Full disclosure, I was actually super bored in my day job. And I thought this would be a fun side project. So I'm just going to start a blog, because it was 2013 and like a little bit before podcasts got really popular. So like, I'm just going to start blogging and write out these stories. And it really started to resonate with people and connect with people and take off. And it ended up being a perfect marriage of my theater and my journalism, because I started being able to figure out how to interview people who had incredible experience and do the research like a journalist, but then be a storyteller like the theatrical person. So also, don't ever let somebody tell you that your degree is worthless. You just never know where it could take you. I always get frustrated by that kind of rhetoric around, especially liberal arts degrees.
Yeah.
You just have to be flexible about what the future might hold. And as the blog kind of started to grow and get traction, I was getting more opportunities to do media, to do presentations. And that led ultimately into getting my first book deal. So the very first book is Broke Millennial, Stop Scraping By and Get Your Financial Life Together. It is written so that you can just open to any chapter at any point and read that by itself. If you're somebody who like has your credit score, great, you're at a 720, but you're still kind of trying to figure out how to aggressively pay off your credit card debt. You got the debt section, but you don't have to read the credit score section. There's budgets, there's all sorts of different areas. But after that first book came out, I started to get a lot of DMs and emails from people being like, hey, you like briefly mentioned investing and you mentioned a couple of books to get, and I got them and they're very complicated and I don't understand them. Do you have any other resources? And that's really what inspired me to write Broke Millennial Takes on Investing, is that it felt like there was not an investing book that was for true beginners. Like, you don't know any of the language. You don't know what an index fund is. You don't know what an expense ratio is. You don't know what a stock really actually is. Of course you don't. You were never taught it. But it feels like with so many of the investing books, they just assume that you've got this download based level of knowledge. So then I wrote Broke Millennial Takes on Investing that also focuses on some millennial centric issues, like, should I be investing when I have student loan debt? Or what are all these apps about? Or robo-advisor or human advisor? What's better? And finally, the third book is Broke Millennial Talks Money, Script Stories and Advice to Navigate Awkward Financial Conversations, because what we have just been talking about is truly, I think, the biggest potential issue for people's financial lives is how to set healthy boundaries with other folks, whether it's friends, family members, romantic partners, even coworkers. And so the book is split up into those 4 sections: work, family, friends, and romance, and how to navigate all of those money conversations, because it is so easy to either let other people spend our money, or when it comes to family dynamics as well, not having the information early about, are you your parents' retirement plan? Are you going to need to help a sibling out? Do you have an ailing relative that you're going to have to care for? All of that's going to impact your financial life. So we have to figure out how to have these conversations that are hard and tough and awkward to navigate. So I wrote actual scripts for how to have them.
So I think you mentioned, not having a traditional job, and more millennials are moving into that space of entrepreneurship. What do you tell them to, they're not able to invest in a 401k?
You have an even more important job of investing for yourself in so many ways, because you are the boss, you are the employer. So there are options for us. You can look at a traditional Roth or a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. Those are options that work just like a 401k does, but they're maxed out at a fairly low limit. It's about $6,500 right now, I believe, this tax year, which in the start sounds like a ton of money, but as your business expands, you're going to want to be able to put more than that away. For reference, people can put $19,500 into their 401ks. I believe is still the number. It might have bumped to 20. So that's a huge difference between what people can put in a 401k and a traditional or a Roth IRA. So for us self-employed people, there are a few other options. There's a solo 401k. There's something called a simple IRA and something called a SEP IRA. Those have much higher contribution limits, which also helps you lower your taxable income. I'm not going to tell you which one to do because it totally depends on how you have your business set up. Have an accountant. Truly, it is worth having somebody else handle your taxes unless you are an accountant who is self-employed. Like, please have someone else handle that when you get into a more complicated tax situation, like being self-employed, because they know things that you're just not going to know. And I think it's just much easier, especially if you end up with like 15 different 1099s like I did last year. And my accountant was pulling his hair out about how many different things I had, but I didn't have to handle it. He did, which is great. And then they can also give you the guidance. And when it comes to finances, that's another big thing to consider. There's a certain amount that you can bootstrap yourself, that you can handle yourself. But at what point do you want to have somebody else help you? And when you do want someone else to help you, the thing I want you to look for is a certified financial planner, a CFP. When it comes to financial advice and financial advisors, fortunately, it's not as heavily regulated as we would like to see. A lot of different people can call themselves financial advisors. So you really want to make sure that the person you're working with is certified in a particular way, that you can do something called go to broker check and put somebody's name in and see if there's any nefarious activities or black marks on their history in terms of what's happened. If you put in the name Bernard Madoff into broker check, you can see that it actually works. And a certified financial planner, the reason I always recommend CFPs, a few things. One, they actually have a certain amount of education requirements that they have to pass, and then a really hard test in order to be a CFP in the first place. They have to have continuing education credits that they get. And then most importantly, they are something called a fiduciary. So there's two different standards, fiduciary and suitability. Fiduciary means they are legally bound to do what is in your best interest. You would think that any financial planner would have to do that. Unfortunately, some are suitability, which is it doesn't hurt you. Very different standard than what is best for you. So always look for a fiduciary. And I personally like the fee-only structure. Anytime you work with somebody, period, really, but especially when it comes to your money, anytime somebody's handling your money, you need to understand how they get paid. Because that could impact what they do with your money. If they're earning commissions, that could make a really big difference on how they're investing for you. So CFPs, you could have the option to work with a fee-only planner. So it's just a straight, this is the fee, this is the cost. They don't get commissions for selling you products. That really simplifies the relationship.
Wow. Well, there's some key takeaways there. I mean, debt snowball, debt avalanche, getting a certified financial planner, the fiduciary, I mean, all that stuff. So we'll actually get all this information from you as well. But again, you can actually get all this information from her, especially on investing with Broke Millennial Takes on Investing. So I believe we have one more question to ask her about. So obviously this is the King Center. You know, we are the Center for Nonviolence and Training and Education. The King Center was established in 1968, the year that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by Mrs. Coretta Scott King. And so I have a question for you. Again, it might not be, there might be. Has Mrs. Coretta Scott King, have you found that their work has impacted your life? Now, it could be directly with this area, with finances and economics and helping people save money, or really just in general, if they have affected your life at all. So have they have any impact on some of the things you've done?
When I truly think about that legacy, one of the big things I think about is the idea of inclusivity overall and like how we communicate with each other and working to be inclusive. Personal finance, in my opinion, is an area that could really use an overhaul in that department. And I think for me, one of the tenets that I take away is anytime I'm writing an article, working on a book, planning a panel, I always ensure that a diversity of voices are included in that work because it makes for a much more interesting, rich tapestry. And also, as I mentioned earlier, you only know the life experience that you've grown up with. Like, you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know, which sounds like a silly way to put it, but it's important to recognize that other people are coming from different lived experiences, and that my way is not always going to be the way that resonates. And I have to then be humble enough to acknowledge, here are other resources that you can go to. And so looking at the legacy of partnership and inclusivity and bringing people together in just a completely healthy, happy, holistic way is really what I personally think about.
Wow. Well, Erin, this was an amazing episode. I know there's crazy takeaway. We're going to make sure we give a plug to your series. That way people continue to learn. They have more questions, more information. They can speak directly to you. Look, we definitely will have to do something again in the future, because I feel like I learned a lot. Do you feel like
we can do a private session, because I have student loans and I need to work it out.
Facts.
I still want to take the vacations.
You can have the balance. It's just about what the trade-offs are.
That's hard, but I'm listening. I listened.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for taking time with us today. This was an amazing episode. And so we will be back with another episode of the ReThink podcast here soon.